Tonight's screening was brought to you by Brita Water Filter. All right, let me introduce to you the director of The Babe, Barry Levinson. And I believe we do have some talent. If we want to just get them to stand up and acknowledge the audience. We have Michael Wallach. The writer. The writer. Stand up. Kevin Donahue, a reporter playing an actress. And thank you. Stand up. The mayor. The mayor. So, you're a terrific group. You really are fantastic. This is one of the first times I've actually sat through a movie that I did with an audience, so I was so kind of taken by the participation of it all that I had to stay and watch. Thank you. So, you were saying that the bulk of this story is based on science fact. Can you talk about what your inspiration was to tell us where it's come from?
What happened was I was approached because I come from Baltimore and did Baltimore movies and Homicide, also in Baltimore. And so I was asked to do a documentary about the Chesapeake Bay because it's 40% dead, and it's the largest estuary in the United States. And so I said, well, let me look into it. I did some research, and I found out that PBS, so they have a series called Frontline, and they did a documentary about the Chesapeake Bay, all of the problems that it has, and they did a great job. And ultimately, and people didn't seem to be that concerned. And I said to the people who brought me into it, I said, look, I can't really do a documentary better than what Frontline did. They did a great documentary. I really don't know where to go. So I didn't do it, and a few weeks later, I was talking with Jason, who's executive producer on this, and I said, it's interesting, all the information and the facts, and like, how would you tell a story, and then that was really it. How do you tell a story? And so I thought of putting it into a theatrical form and tell the story and use the facts to support the story, to advance it, to unnerve us, to scare us, and to build it in that fashion. And then ultimately we brought Mike in, and then we began to fashion the piece from it. So it's using a lot of the information, a lot of the factual things to set it in motion and to give a credibility to the piece. I mean, you can't sit and watch a movie about facts or whatever, but you can support the piece that way. And that's really how it began. Well, it seemed to make sense that if you want to try to like tell this one story, or this one event through multiple things. And because people on that given day or any day, whatever event takes place, there's always people who are videoing with their cell phones, and every form of communication takes place. So we go, well, why don't you just gather together? And it's multiple stories, and it's expansive. I know most of those sort of exist in a house, in the woods, in that. This is sort of more expansive, and it backs up with the oceanographers weeks before. But it also required us to use various digital platforms throughout. So I think there's something like 21 different digital formats being used. So each group is using a different kind of a camera. The higher end would have been what Donna's camera would be doing, because it was for television. That would have been the higher end. And everything else we did was really low-end stuff. And you're seeing it projected here on a pretty good-sized screen. We didn't go to red cameras. We didn't go to any of the real high-end stuff. It's pretty, consumer products, basically. I think the Canon 5D we used, which would have been one of the upscale cameras for us. And you had to kind of pick, okay, this sequence, now we're going back to the young girl, and therefore we're using the iPhone system. And for this, we're doing this. And so each character had their own camera, so you have to kind of track it.
Have any questions from the audience? Yes?
Yeah, I'm from that area, and people here probably don't know, but anytime you eat Purdue chicken, that's where the chicken was wondering if you wanted to use the name and didn't get the rights to it, or did you not consider it?
I think probably too many lawsuits might have. Now, they say they don't use steroids. However, somehow, in some miraculous way, that a 3-day-old chick can basically get to 6 pounds in 42 days. It used to take 6 months, but they don't use steroids. And they say, well, it's an antibiotic. And then, of course, you say, well, can we just take a look at the feed and see what it is? And no, you can't, because it's proprietary interest. So you can't even check what they're actually feeding them or what they're doing. They say that it's not steroids. But somehow that growth pattern is extremely rapid. So we couldn't use them, and we don't, because otherwise they can probably say, well, you didn't do it, wasn't this X number of tons, too many legal aspects to it. But, the chicken industry is a chicken industry. We were actually using an abandoned, chicken farm that we came upon, and the guy who used to run it was saying that the chickens, that they became so fragile, and that, for instance, if like a door slammed too loudly, like 250 chickens would die of a heart attack. That they're so fragile they can barely walk, etc. And he was telling us a lot of information just about all that. So the issue really is, this is not something that can be corrected. If people really sat down and they really tried to work out a way to improve, we could improve it. It's not like some unknown. We know what contributes to it. We just haven't made that kind of an effort, you're not radically overnight going to change everything, but you can certainly improve upon where that is. And the Chesapeake Bay is certainly, terrible in terms of 40% dead, but there are these places all through North America that can be improved if we just gave a little extra effort. I mean, there is no reason that in the United States that the filtration system for water is a D-. There is no reason for it, other than, well, it costs too much money.
Is the film coming out in the States before the election?
I think it begins in a slow release on November 2nd. I think here and in Canada, I think it's the same dates.
And what was the second question?
Well, as I said, because, by meeting with these people about this documentary and then going through it and then collecting all the information and seeing how terrible it was, and then, of course, not, as I said, not doing the documentary, and then saying, well, let's take all those facts and let's put it into a theatrical experience with characters and behavior and storytelling, and still carry this information. I don't think it bogs the movie down. As I said, I think it enhances it in some ways. But that way, I think you can carry it all together. So, you can watch a movie and get caught up in the characters, you have some moments, get scared or to laugh. And afterwards, if there are things that you want to talk about it, hey, great, as opposed to it's not about anything. So I don't want the piece to get lost in what is trying to be said as a message. It is just part of the piece.
Go home and Google search images of isopods. Yes, in the back right here.
Speaking of isopods, thank you. Just wondering if you could tell us a bit about how you created the isopods. Was that
How do we create the isopod?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, they are for real. So what we're trying to do is we have to do some CGI work, like coming out of the fish's mouth and going up the guy's arm. That we have to CGI it. Oddly enough, in the very beginning, when the oceanographer is holding up the tweezer and said, this is, an isopod, it's sometimes referred to as sea lice. Those were real, because we were shooting in South Carolina, and the fish that we caught actually had isopods or sea lice on them. So that's fairly common. In the sea lice version of it, they do continue to evolve. And so those were actually real, and the others we have to do CGI work to create that. The which one? No, the 2-foot one is for real. That is an actual photo taken from, I don't know, off of Google search. I mean, that 2 feet. That we didn't have that in the film, but we show the range of the isopod family.
Mr. Levinson, was the fact that you were using so many different formats, was that an editorial nightmare, and how did you deal with that?
No, actually, to be honest with you, as complicated as it may seem, it was fairly simple. I think we had very good organization, that everything had to be downloaded, you know, throughout the day, and then everything had to line up in terms of its digital things, so it all can feed into an Avid, so that you can do it. Or I don't think we use an Avid. I think we were using what were we using, Jason? Final Cut. Yeah. So we did it on Final Cut, and so we had to set up, you know, that we take the chip and then we would download it and translate it, so everything would have a consistency to it. Yes.
I just want to ask you, I can see how digital formatting would be useful for this film, but what are your choices? Are you team digital, are you team 35 mil, and where do you stand in the future of filmmaking?
Where do I stand in the future of filmmaking in terms of digital versus film?
Yeah.
Well, I think what's going to happen in the next few years, everything will be digital. I think it'll be a rare case when, you know, black and white. When I was going to say, when black and white used to be a form, and then all of a sudden it disappeared. Like we can only watch, you know, color. I mean, there used to be, when I was a kid, there were black and white movies and color movies, and we went, okay. We didn't go, why is that in black and white, and why is that in Technicolor? You know, and certain movies seem better in black and white. But in the end, it died out. And I think because of the transition that's taking place in a digital world, I think everything will become digital in the future. Yes?
Within the movie, what would be the result of all this footage? Should we put it online, or kind of shut it down, or just, what is the future within the movie?
Where would the movie go after?
Yeah, after, like she says, sign off.
Sign off. Where did it go?
Yeah.
Probably in today's world, it would have probably gone onto, you know, one of the online services, you know, played in parts on YouTube, etc. You know, 10-minute segments. Yes.
I've seen lots of bad horror movies. How did you move so flawlessly and do like a really, really good horror movie?
The question is, like, you said you've seen so many bad horror movies. How did you move so fluidly and make such a good horror movie?
I don't know. I mean, you just follow, you know, what your instincts are and how people should behave and how the camera should work. I mean, one of the logistical issues about the movie is you can't do a two-shot, an over-the-shoulder, a tighter single. You know, you can't do that. You don't have. That's not the tools you're working with, because you say, well, how come they're on this angle and this angle and this angle? So most of the time, it's a particular camera. So that if you want to show more, you have to figure out how to choreograph the scene. So like the young couple on the boat, you know, he's videoing her, and then she sort of is in a two-shot, and then she takes the camera away from him, and then he goes into the water. So that's the only way to show it, is to figure out how do you choreograph it. Or the young couple, the young kids by the pier, that he's videoing her. She takes the camera from him. He's wandering down to the pier. Now we see him. Then, as she's going onto the pier, he takes the camera back and then jumps into the water, and then he jumps in with the camera, and then the camera falls away, and it grabs these extra shots. That's the only way you can do the scene, so you have to figure, well, how do I make this work? And you say, okay, well, I have a surveillance camera, I can use that. How do I do these other shots? Because you do have to you have to be credible within your form. And so that's a kind of design you got to figure out in your head. How do I actually shoot this scene without coverage? So if you would take like the police, coming to the 911, it starts 5 blocks away in a police car responding. And then you're following it down streets and things, and they pull up, and they get out, they walk back into the front of the car, and now they're having a conversation with the sheriff. It's all one shot. So it's kind of, you have to figure it out.
And one last question here, guys.
With homicide, you managed to bring exceptional handheld photography to the world, and obviously for dogma and all that stuff. With this, you're just showing that found footage films can actually be shot with intelligence that a director really brings to them. I'm wondering if there's part of you, though, that wants for future projects to just go back to crane shots and giant dollies. An old school, old-fashioned, glossy movie.
Yes.
Where you next project to discuss whether the limitations of digital and handheld shaky stuff, you just want to somehow just keep it over your...
Well, look, every project that you do has a design to it. So you have to find what works for, say, that, you might say an old-time form of a certain kind of way of filming. So I think every film speaks as to how to approach it. And so this one needed to be this ragged thing of you're running around with your camera trying to do it, and it doesn't have real good composition, and you try to do the bad composition to make the bad composition look interesting. And so I understand what you're saying, and it'll be interesting to see how film language evolves in the next decade.
And I'd like to ask you, just because I noticed it on the subway a week before the film festival, you have a new TV show coming out.
Yes, we shot here in Canada called Copper. Yeah. Copper takes place in 1864 in 5 Points, New York, Manhattan. And it also deals with, the immigration that was coming in, the Irish immigration. It's during the Civil War. It's the last year of the Civil War. And so it deals with a lot of the issues of poverty, of immigration, of wealth and privilege. And it's, the story is told through a couple of cops, New York's finest, 1864. And so it's a very interesting story, I think, and a great setting. But we filmed it here at don't even ask me where it was, I have no idea, but it was an old tire factory that we had to build like 5 blocks of 5 Points with all the various streets and the interiors that connect to the exteriors, etc. It's a pretty elaborate set, and it looks really fantastic, and the stories are quite interesting. So if you got a chance, you ought to check it out. It's playing here as well on Showcase.
All right, thank you very much. Very much. Of course, follow us on Twitter, MMadnessTiff. And as we're going out, I'm going to let you know, we haven't really talked about it much, but Lightbox, Halloween, we will have George Romero on stage for a conversation with him. Then we will show Creepshow on Halloween. And how can it get better? A week later, we're going to have a triple bill. Night of the Living Dead, Dawn of the Dead, Day of the Dead. Stay tuned. Thank you very much, and see you for the rest of the festival.